You've spent years believing something that isn't true. You look in the mirror, you spot another gray strand, and you tell yourself the same story everyone tells you. It's genetics, it's just aging, there's nothing you can do about it. You've probably repeated that story to other people too. Maybe a friend who noticed their first gray hair in their 20s. Maybe your own reflection at 3 in the morning under bathroom lighting that makes everything look worse than it is. But that story is incomplete, and in some cases it's flat out wrong, because right now, hair samples sit in a lab at Columbia University that prove something remarkable. Gray hair can come back. Not with dye. Not with a $500 serum promising miracles on a label. With biology you can actually influence, starting with what's on your plate. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what's happening inside every one of your hair follicles the moment a strand turns gray. Why your doctor might be missing the real cause if you're graying young. What actually doesn't work despite being marketed to you constantly. And 6 specific foods with real research behind them that target the exact mechanisms your body uses to keep hair pigmented. This isn't a wellness fad dressed up in science language. It's what's actually printed in dermatology journals right now, sitting in databases most people never think to search. So let's start with the biology, because you can't fix what you don't understand, and you've been trying to fix this for years without ever being handed the actual mechanism. Every hair on your head grows out of a tiny structure called a follicle, and tucked inside that follicle, near the base, is a population of cells called melanocytes. You can picture them as small, dedicated workers whose entire job is producing a molecule called melanin. And melanin is what gives your hair its color, whether that's black, brown, red, or blonde. As long as your melanocytes are active and healthy, they keep injecting melanin into each strand as it grows upward through the follicle. The moment they slow down or disappear, the new hair growing out of that follicle comes in without color, and that's what you see as gray. If the follicle loses its melanocytes completely, with nothing left producing pigment at all, the hair comes in white instead. Here's the part almost nobody tells you, the piece that gets left out of every surface-level explanation you've encountered. Your melanocytes don't work alone forever, and they don't last indefinitely on their own. They get replenished by a reservoir of stem cells sitting at the base of the follicle. Those stem cells are what keep your hair pigmented year after year, decade after decade, quietly restocking your pigment factory as older melanocytes wear out. When that reservoir runs low, your factory runs out of workers to replace the ones that retire. This is where an enzyme called tyrosinase enters the story, and tyrosinase is the engine that converts an amino acid called tyrosine into melanin, the actual chemical conversion that produces your pigment. Without enough functioning tyrosinase, your follicle simply can't make color even if some melanocytes are technically still alive and present. Here's the detail that matters most for you tonight. Tyrosinase needs a specific mineral to activate and function properly. It needs copper. Without adequate copper circulating in your system, your tyrosinase can't do its job, full stop, regardless of how many melanocytes you still have. Dermatology researchers have documented this directly and specifically. A study published in the open-access Macedonian Journal of Medical Sciences confirmed that copper deficiency leads to hypopigmentation because your melanin-producing cells lose the functional ability to maintain their normal pigment output even while the cells themselves remain alive. There's a second mechanism working against you, and it's one you've almost certainly never heard mentioned anywhere. Not by a hairdresser, not by a pharmacy shelf full of supplements, not even by most general practitioners. Your hair follicles constantly produce a small amount of hydrogen peroxide as a natural byproduct of ordinary cell activity. The same hydrogen peroxide you might recognize from a brown bottle in your bathroom cabinet. In young, healthy follicles, an enzyme called catalase breaks that hydrogen peroxide down efficiently before it causes any damage, clearing it out as fast as it's produced. But as you age, or under conditions of chronic oxidative stress, your catalase activity drops off, and when that happens, hydrogen peroxide starts to accumulate inside the hair shaft itself. It quite literally bleaches your hair from the inside out, using the exact same chemical process as the bleach in a salon bottle, except your own body is generating it internally. Researchers studying this have called it an internal bleaching effect, and they consider it one of the most underappreciated contributors to graying that exists, Precisely because it isn't about running out of pigment supply, it's about actively destroying pigment that your follicle already successfully produced. Now here's where the story gets personal. Because you might be sitting there assuming your own graying is purely written into your DNA, fixed and unchangeable, something you inherited and can do nothing about. For most people, genetics does set the general timeline. That part is true. Dermatologists talk about something called the 50-50-50 rule, the idea that 50% of the population has about 50% gray hair by around age 50. But notice what that actually is. It's a population average, not a personal life sentence. And it absolutely does not explain why you specifically might be seeing significant gray in your 20s or 30s, well outside that expected window. When graying shows up early, ahead of the genetic schedule your family history would predict, researchers increasingly point towards something correctable sitting underneath it. A nutrient deficiency your blood work could actually catch. Chronic oxidative stress from your environment or your habits. Or, in some rigorously documented cases, psychological stress itself, measured and tracked with real data rather than assumed. Let's talk about that stress connection in detail, because in 2020, a team at Columbia University's Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons published research that fundamentally changed how scientists think about graying. This wasn't a small blog post or a wellness influencer's theory. It was published in the peer-reviewed journal eLife. Led by Martin Picard, an associate professor of behavioral medicine, the research team developed an entirely new way to digitize and measure the exact pigmentation pattern along a single strand of hair, essentially reading each individual hair like a time-stamped diary of your recent biological history. Think about what that means. Every hair on your head has been recording information about your stress levels this entire time, and until this study, almost nobody had a way to actually read that record. What the team found surprised even the researchers themselves. Hair color loss tracked directly, in fine-grained detail, with periods of high psychological stress in their study participants. In at least one documented case, something even more remarkable happened. One participant went on vacation, and 5 individual hairs on that person's head reverted from gray back to their natural pigmented color, synchronized precisely in time with that stress-free period away, not gradually over years, but synchronized with a specific break from stress. The senior author on that study said something worth sitting with. In his own words, their data added to a growing body of evidence that human aging isn't a straight, fixed, one-way process moving only in a single direction. It can, in some cases, be paused or even temporarily reversed. The mechanism the team identified involves your mitochondria, the energy-producing structures inside nearly every cell in your body. The same structures you might remember from a biology class being called the powerhouse of the cell. Under stress, mitochondria respond poorly and fail to properly energize the very cells responsible for making hair pigment. Take away the stress, and in early-stage cases, that energy delivery comes back online, and pigment production can resume. You should know the limits here too, because overselling this to you would be dishonest, and dishonesty isn't the point of this video. Once a hair has already grown out past your scalp, it's done. It's locked into whatever color it grew in with at that moment, permanently, because hair is essentially dead structural tissue once it exits the follicle. What changes, what can actually shift, is the new hair growing inside the follicle going forward from this point on. Once melanocyte stem cells are fully and permanently depleted in a particular follicle, that reservoir you learned about earlier completely exhausted, no amount of stress relief, no supplement, and no food is going to bring that specific follicle back online. The window for reversal is real, documented and published in a respected journal, but it's also time-sensitive, and it applies most clearly to recent, early-stage graying rather than hair that's been fully white for a decade or more. So where does that leave you, practically speaking? It leaves you with a genuinely actionable strategy, not vague reassurance, because if a meaningful percentage of premature graying traces back to nutrient shortfalls your body is actively dealing with right now, today, then food becomes one of the most direct levers you personally control, more direct than most people realize. Dermatology literature has repeatedly linked premature graying with deficiencies in vitamin B12, vitamin D, iron, calcium, ferritin, copper, and zinc across multiple independent studies rather than a single isolated finding. A case control study published in the Indian Journal of Pediatric Dermatology tested serum levels in people with premature graying against a healthy control group matched for age, and found significantly lower levels of zinc, magnesium, and vitamin B12 in the group experiencing early gray hair, with results reaching statistical significance. This is not speculation dressed up as science, it's measured blood work, published in a peer-reviewed journal, comparing real patients against real controls. Before you get to the 6 foods themselves, it's worth pausing on what doesn't work, because you've almost certainly encountered these claims, and it's worth understanding exactly why they fall short. Plucking a gray hair does not cause more grays to grow in its place. Despite what you might have heard as a teenager, that's a myth about visual perception, not biology, since surrounding hairs simply become more noticeable once one is removed. Topical dyes and gray coverage sprays do exactly one thing. They cover color. They do nothing whatsoever for the underlying melanocyte activity inside your follicle. And supplement companies selling biotin, copper, zinc, and selenium blends specifically marketed for gray hair reversal are, according to dermatology reviews, using ingredients whose efficacy for this specific purpose has not actually been demonstrated in controlled trials, even though those same minerals do have real, documented roles when a genuine measured deficiency exists. The difference matters enormously. Correcting an actual deficiency, confirmed with blood work, is supported by published case reports. Taking a supplement blend, hoping it helps, without knowing whether you're even deficient in the first place, is a shot in the dark dressed up in scientific-sounding packaging. Now you're ready for the 6 foods, and you'll understand precisely why each one earns its place on this list, because each one targets a specific named mechanism you just learned about, rather than a vague promise. The first food you need on your radar is oysters. And if shellfish isn't part of your regular routine, cashews and dark chocolate can step in as accessible backup options that still deliver meaningfully. Here's exactly why oysters specifically matter to you. They're one of the single richest natural sources of copper you can eat in an ordinary diet. And you now know precisely what copper does for you, because you just learned the mechanism directly. Copper activates tyrosinase, the enzyme your melanocytes depend on completely to actually manufacture melanin from raw materials. Without enough copper circulating in your system, you can have technically healthy, technically living pigment cells that still cannot produce color, because the machinery inside them is missing the mineral required to switch it on. A relatively small serving of oysters delivers an outsized dose of copper compared to almost anything else in a typical diet, which is exactly why dermatology researchers keep circling back to copper status, specifically when they investigate unexplained early graying in patients who otherwise seem healthy. If you've already had your iron and your B12 checked, following general advice, but nobody ever mentioned copper, this is the mineral that's been hiding in plain sight the entire time, sitting outside the standard panel most doctors default to ordering. The second food belongs in almost every serious conversation about hair color, and that's beef liver, with eggs and fortified nutritional yeast serving as accessible alternatives if organ meat genuinely isn't part of your routine or your preferences. This is about vitamin B12, and out of every single nutrient linked to premature graying across the research you've encountered tonight, B12 has the strongest and most consistently documented clinical evidence behind it, by a meaningful margin. Here's the exact mechanism at work. B12 is essential for healthy cell turnover throughout your body, and for producing the healthy blood cells that deliver oxygen and nutrients to every actively working tissue, including the melanocytes tucked inside your hair follicles. When your B12 levels drop, that delivery system slows down measurably. Your follicles become undernourished at the cellular level, even though nothing about your diet may feel dramatically different day to day, and pigment production suffers as a direct downstream consequence of that slowdown. This connection is strong enough, clinically speaking, that dermatologists specifically look for premature graying as a recognizable warning sign when they suspect a patient might be developing a B12 deficiency, treating it as a visible clue rather than a coincidence. There are documented case reports in dermatological literature, including a case series published in the Journal of Clinical and Diagnostic Research, describing patients whose gray hairs measurably darkened after several months of correcting a confirmed B12 deficiency through targeted supplementation, tracked and photographed over time. The honest caveat matters here too, and it's worth repeating rather than glossing over. This works best specifically when the graying is recent and directly traceable to the deficiency itself, not when it's the product of decades of ordinary genetic programming running its course. But if you're under 35 and graying noticeably faster than feels expected for your family history, B12 status is one of the very first things worth investigating with an actual blood test, and liver remains one of the most concentrated natural sources available to you at the grocery store. The third food is one you've probably been told to eat your entire life for completely different reasons, usually framed around general health rather than hair specifically, and that's leafy greens like spinach, along with lentils and other legumes sitting right alongside them in the produce aisle. These foods are rich in folate, also known as vitamin B9, and folate works as a direct metabolic partner to B12 in the exact same pathways that support healthy melanocyte function inside your follicles. Research has specifically flagged folate alongside B12 when investigating micronutrient status in people experiencing premature graying, because the two vitamins operate together in an interconnected loop rather than independently. You can think of B12 and folate as two workers running the same production line side by side, and if one of them runs short, the entire process slows down noticeably, even when the other nutrient happens to be technically adequate on its own. This is part of why isolated single vitamin fixes so often disappoint people who try them expecting one supplement to solve everything. Your body doesn't process these nutrients as separate, independent systems. It processes them as a coordinated network, and leafy greens give you a direct, genuinely low-effort way to keep that entire network properly supplied without needing a prescription or a specialist appointment. The fourth food targets a mineral that gets far less public attention than it actually deserves, given the research behind it, and that's pumpkin seeds, which happen to be a strong source of zinc alongside a meaningful secondary amount of copper in the same handful. Remember that Indian Journal of Pediatric Dermatology study mentioned earlier in detail? Zinc came up as one of the specific nutrients measured significantly lower in people experiencing premature graying compared directly to healthy, age-matched controls. Zinc plays a role in building keratin, the structural protein that physically makes up your hair strand itself, and it supports the broader hair follicle cycle that your melanocytes depend on to function properly. A modest handful of pumpkin seeds gives you meaningful zinc alongside additional copper in the same sitting, effectively targeting two of your pigment-supporting minerals through a single, simple, portable snack you could eat at your desk. If you've been reaching for a generic multivitamin hoping it covers your bases without really knowing what's inside it, pumpkin seeds are a real, whole food source, doing double duty on exactly the two minerals dermatology research keeps flagging repeatedly across multiple independent studies. The fifth food takes you back directly to that catalase and hydrogen peroxide mechanism explained earlier, and that's dark berries, specifically blackberries and blueberries sitting together in the produce section. These are among the most antioxidant-dense foods you can realistically eat on a regular basis, and antioxidants exist specifically to neutralize the oxidative stress that degrades your catalase activity over time, slowing that internal wear and tear process down. Remember precisely what happens when catalase activity drops off. Hydrogen peroxide accumulates inside the hair shaft and bleaches pigment from the inside, using your body's own chemistry against itself. A diet consistently rich in antioxidants gives your body meaningfully more support in keeping that internal bleaching process in check, actively protecting the melanin your follicles are still successfully producing, rather than only trying to boost raw production while ignoring what's actively degrading it in the background. This is a defensive strategy as much as it is an offensive one, and it works alongside every other food on this list rather than competing with them or replacing them. The sixth and final food circles back to something you might not immediately expect on a list about hair color, and that's fatty fish like salmon or mackerel, sitting in the same category as an omega-3 supplement bottle, but delivering it through actual food. This connects to two separate threads you've already learned about tonight, tying the entire video together. First, fatty fish is one of the best dietary sources of vitamin D available to you, and while its exact causal role in graying is still being actively clarified and debated by researchers rather than fully settled, Low vitamin D has repeatedly shown up, measured in the same population of people experiencing premature hair color loss across multiple studies. Second, and just as important if not more so, the omega-3 fatty acids in fatty fish support the same mitochondrial energy production that Martin Picard's team at Columbia identified as central to the entire stress and graying connection you learned about earlier. Remember, mitochondria are the antennas responding to stress signals throughout your body, constantly, in real time, and keeping those energy-producing structures well supported nutritionally gives your melanocytes a genuinely better chance at staying active and functional even during demanding, high-stress periods of your life that you can't always avoid or control. Fatty fish essentially supports two separate systems at once, the direct nutrient side and the underlying stress resilience side, which is exactly why it earns the final spot on this list rather than being an afterthought. So here's what this actually means for you, laid out as plainly and honestly as possible. If you're seeing gray hair that arrived earlier than you expected, well before your family history would predict it, the honest, evidence-based answer isn't to panic, and it isn't to simply ignore it and hope it resolves on its own either. It's to look at what's actually measurable through your own blood work. Get your B12, your copper, your zinc, your iron, and your vitamin D checked specifically, by name, rather than accepting a generic wellness panel. Because dermatology research has repeatedly connected deficiencies in exactly these nutrients with premature graying in controlled studies, comparing real patients, not just informal anecdotes passed around online. Build your plate around the 6 foods you just learned in detail. Oysters or cashews, for copper, liver, or eggs for B12. Leafy greens and lentils for folate. Pumpkin seeds for zinc. Dark berries for antioxidant protection against that internal bleaching process, and fatty fish for vitamin D, alongside mitochondrial support. And take the stress in your life seriously as a genuine physiological input affecting your body, not just an emotional inconvenience you push through. Because Columbia's own published, peer-reviewed research demonstrated real, measurable hair pigment reversal when psychological stress genuinely lifted for a study participant. Tracked and documented rather than assumed. None of this promises you'll wake up tomorrow with every gray hair gone, and anyone telling you that is selling you something rather than informing you. That would be dishonest, and dishonesty isn't what this video has been about from the opening line. What the research does genuinely support is this: premature graying is not always the fixed, unchangeable sentence you've been told it is your entire life, by people who never look deeper into the mechanism. In a meaningful number of documented cases, it's your body sending you a specific, readable signal, a nutrient shortfall your blood work can catch, an oxidative stress load your antioxidant intake can help offset, mitochondria under pressure that omega-3 fatty acids and stress reduction can support. And signals like these can actually be responded to, rather than simply endured. The window is real, but it's also time-sensitive, which means the earlier you address what's genuinely happening inside your follicles at the cellular level, the better your odds of working with your biology instead of just quietly accepting the incomplete story you were handed years ago. You've spent this entire video learning what your hair has been trying to tell you this whole time. What you do with that information starting today is entirely up to you.